Radd, a nutritionist and author, and I'd like to talk to you today about a condition that's more prevalent than high blood cholesterol and kills more Western women than breast cancer each year. The condition is called osteoporosis. We're going to look at in the next half an hour what is osteoporosis, why women are at much higher risk of developing this disease than men, and importantly, what factors you can adopt in your lifestyle to reduce your own risk. Specifically, I will also be addressing the role of soy foods in reducing the risk of osteoporosis. Whilst not much is known about soy foods amongst the general public, there's been a lot of research suggesting that these foods are vitally important to be included into a diet and a healthy lifestyle, and that they can reduce the risk of osteoporosis beyond just following conventional guidelines such as having a high calcium intake. But first, let's look at some startling facts about osteoporosis in Australia. Did you know that hip fractures and their complications kill more Western women each year than breast cancer? And yet, so many women are concerned about breast cancer, they should be concerned about their bones. 1 in 5 people who develop a hip fracture die within 6 months. These are startling facts. And by the year 2020, the Garvan Institute in Australia estimated that 1 in 5 hospital beds will be occupied by elderly women with fractures. So Australia really needs to sit up and take notice, because osteoporosis is a silent but deadly killer. Now, why is it that women are 3 times more likely to develop osteoporosis than men? In fact, within the first few years of menopause, they can lose 7 to 8% of their bone, and by 7 years, 20% of their bone is missing. We also have the 50-50 rule, which means that 50% of women after the age of 50 can expect a bone fracture. And sadly, up to 26% of women never leave hospital or a nursing home after they sustain a hip fracture. There is a difference between men and women in the level of the hormone estrogen that's found in the body. And estrogen is an incredibly important hormone for many reasons, but specifically for our bones. Before the menopause, when women have high levels of estrogen in their body, they're at a low risk of developing osteoporosis. But after the menopause, when estrogen levels can plummet by about 70%, their risk of osteoporosis increases dramatically. So osteoporosis basically means porous bones. And despite what you may be thinking, that your skeleton is just dead and it's a bit like the wooden structure in a house just holding up other parts of you for support, this is not correct. In fact, our skeleton is live and well, usually, and it's maintained by 2 crews of different cells. So in fact, if you're sitting down right now while you're watching this presentation, the bones that you're sitting on now are quite different to the bones you were sitting on 2 years ago. The 2 types of cells are called osteoclasts. These are the bone dissolving cells, and osteoblasts. These are the bone forming cells. And the interaction of these 2 cells is incredibly important. When the activity of the osteoclasts, the bone dissolving cells, exceeds that of the bone forming cells, we get less calcium being deposited into the bones than is being removed. This is when we get porous bones and we develop osteoporosis. Now, as mentioned earlier, estrogen is critical for good bone health. So when we lose large amounts of estrogen, we start losing bone very, very rapidly. Similarly to estrogens, there are natural substances found in a range of plant foods, but particularly richly so in soybeans and soy foods, and these substances are called phytoestrogens or phytoestrogens. What does this term mean? Well, phyto is a Greek word and it simply means plant. So anything to do with phyto means plant. something. Estrogen is a hormone found in the bodies of men and women. And in fact, men have more estrogen on board than does a postmenopausal woman, which will help to explain why postmenopausal women are at higher risk of osteoporosis than men are. Also, the fact that men start off with a higher bone mass helps to explain why they are at lower risk, but not completely lacking the risk of osteoporosis. So phytoestrogens are these natural estrogen-like substances found in plant foods, particularly in soy foods and soya beans. What's important to understand is phytoestrogens are not one and the same as estrogens or estrogens. A lot of people get very confused about the terminology, and they assume quite wrongly that even though you get these things from plants, they're exactly the same as estrogens. In fact, they often ask, does soya bean have estrogen in it? Well, no, it doesn't. It has phytoestrogen in it. And perhaps the terminology that was initially developed wasn't the smartest terminology because it confuses people. The difference is that these compounds are much weaker in their effects than real estrogen. They also have many different effects to estrogen. Sometimes they can act similarly, sometimes in fact they oppose the harmful effects of estrogen in the body. So we consider them as smart molecules of nature. If you look at the diagram here, it'll show you the structure of estradiol, the most common estrogen found in the human body, and secondly the structure of one of the phytoestrogens found or derived from eating soy foods called genisteins. Now you can see why people get confused. Even to the naked eye these things appear similar, and yes, they share similarities, but they also have subtle but important differences. And this is critical to understand because many people get a bit paranoid and concerned about eating phytoestrogens because they think they're eating girly hormones. And yet I can tell you that phytoestrogens are just important for men as they are for women, particularly in terms of reducing the risk of heart disease and protecting their prostate against cancer. So how did we become interested in soy and phytoestrogens and bone health? Well, what was intriguing scientists was why was it that amongst Asian populations who actually traditionally have a low intake of dairy products and therefore of calcium, why is it that these populations have low rates of hip fractures compared to, say, populations with the highest intake of dairy products who incidentally also have the highest rates of hip fractures? Something doesn't make sense. Clearly, whilst calcium is important, it's not the only important nutrient in foods for your bones. So people started to research the Asian communities, Asian populations, to work out what was different about their lifestyle. And while there are several aspects